Hey, friend, welcome back to She Said podcast. I'm your host, Laura Cox Kaplan, and I am really excited to bring you this very special Halloween edition of the podcast. Last week in episode 341, we talked about how to influence the most important person in the room, you. I shared 4 tools for strengthening your inner dialogue because when your inner influence is strong, everything else you do, every meeting, every message, every relationship gets stronger too. But here's the thing. Sometimes, even when we know what to do, we still get stuck. Something keeps us from putting all those great tools to work. And since it's Halloween week this week, I thought we'd talk about what might be haunting your influence. Those invisible forces that whisper, you're not ready, or don't mess this up, or someone else is already doing this better. Those ghosts, if you will, of course, aren't supernatural. They are psychological, but they can be just as scary if we don't identify and name them. And unlike the Halloween decorations that are going to come down next week, these ghosts, well, they tend to stick around all year if we let them. So today, I want to walk you through 3 of the most common, we'll call them influence ghosts, that can sabotage your confidence and your impact. And I'm going to give you a few simple evidence-based ways that you can exercise them. The first is the ghost of perfectionism past. Now, this ghost usually shows up when you're over-editing or over-preparing or maybe waiting for something to really feel ready. It's the opposite of leaning into discomfort. Now, perfectionism can often masquerade itself as high standards. And for many of us, that has been rewarded our whole lives. It's actually a good thing, right? Think about it. You were probably the student who triple-checked her work, the team member who stayed late to polish the presentation just one more time, the person who rewrote that email 3 more times before hitting send, and you got positive feedback for it, right? You were so thorough. Oh, such attention to detail. She really cares about the quality. So perfectionism became part of your identity, part of your value proposition, if you will. But here's what nobody told you, potentially. Perfectionism works beautifully for executing someone else's vision, for following instructions, for coloring inside the lines. But when you're trying to create something and lead something and build something new, perfectionism becomes a cage. It keeps us trapped in what psychologist Carol Dweck refers to as a fixed mindset. Essentially, the belief that success equals flawlessness rather than learning. That our work essentially reflects our worth. That if we put something imperfect out into the world, we're going to be somehow diminished by that. Now, let me give you a real example from my own life. When I first started this podcast, I would record episodes often multiple times. And if I heard myself saying, or if I lost my train of thought for a second, I would stop and I would start all over again. One episode, I recorded it something like 7 or 8 times. Ridiculous, right? Somebody working with me on production back in those early days said to me, Laura, the imperfections are actually what makes this feel like a conversation. When you're too polished, you sound like you're reading a script, as opposed to really trying to connect with your audience. Your audience wants to hear you. They want to know you. And I'll tell you, friend, that was a really important aha. It meant that I had to let go of the ghost of perfectionism, or at least become more aware of her, because she was saying to me, you can't publish anything unless it's absolutely 100% perfect. Now, because that ghost wasn't protecting my credibility, she was preventing me from building a body of work. Here's another really great example that I see constantly with many of the women that I coach. A woman that I'll call Jane was invited to speak at a major industry conference, and she spent like 3 months preparing for a 20-minute talk. She had 87 slides. She practiced until she could recite it word for word. And you know what happened? She was so focused on delivering that speech perfectly that she forgot to make eye contact with the audience. She didn't respond to their energy. She didn't notice when something landed or when something needed clarification. She did deliver a near perfect speech, but the room felt really distant. And so therefore, it was far from perfect. Now, I've certainly found myself in Jane's shoes, and maybe you have too. Compare that presentation to another speaker who had only 10 slides. She told stories from her actual experience. She stumbled over words here and there, but she laughed at herself and she said, "You know what I mean?" to the audience, and they loved her because she was present with them. She wasn't performing for them. And she was working to actually connect with them, which is really the most important thing. When this ghost of perfectionism is whispering in your ear, it's important to remind yourself that progress is what builds influence, not perfection. So in order to get a handle on this, if this is something that resonates with you, here's a little micro tool. Try to capture at least one or two small micro wins each day. Write those down. Today, I sent the draft even though it wasn't perfect. Today, I raised my hand in the meeting and I asked a really thoughtful question. Today, I published the post even though I could have edited it maybe a little bit more. The brain encodes motion as momentum, and that is what keeps your confidence alive. You can train yourself to value iteration over perfection, forward movement over flawless execution. Okay, let's talk about the second ghost, the dark shadow of comparison. This ghost thrives in scroll culture. You see someone else's highlight reel, for example, and suddenly you feel like your own story is so small. Let me paint a picture. You're making real progress on something that matters to you. Maybe you're building a community program, or you've launched a side project, or maybe you're working toward a new leadership role, and you feel so good about it. And then you open up LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, and there she is. Someone in your field who just announced that she's raised $2 million in funding or got promoted to VP or published a new book or spoke at a TED conference or all of the above and has 50,000 followers and on and on and on. And just like that, all that progress that you made starts to feel insignificant. And you think to yourself, why am I even doing this? Someone else is already doing it better. I'm so far behind. I'll never catch up. Does this sound familiar? But here's what's really interesting. Comparison isn't always bad. It's data. It can reveal what you value and what you aspire to. The problem isn't the comparison itself. It's what you do with it. The trick is to shift from comparison to curiosity. And here's what I mean. Ask yourself, what specifically am I admiring here? Is it this person's creativity, her courage, her consistency, her platform, her confidence, her network, maybe her ability to articulate ideas clearly, and name what that is? Next, use that as your inspiration rather than evidence that you're behind. And let me give you an example. A few years ago, I was following another podcaster who seemed like she had it all figured out. She had major sponsors, incredible guests, beautiful website, and she was everywhere. Keynote stages, magazine features, the works. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm doing all of this work and I'm barely making any progress. What is the point? But then I did something different. Instead of spiraling, I got curious. And I asked myself, what specifically am I most envious of? And the answer was her ability to get in front of the right audiences, her visibility strategy. But here's the thing, um, the sacrifices that she was making in order to get in front of those audiences, those were things that I was not willing to trade off. So instead of feeling defeated, I studied this. How was she doing this? What patterns could I learn? And then I asked myself, given my experience equity, my skills in policy and business and communications, my network, my unique perspective, how might I build visibility in a way that is actually authentic to me? That shift from I could never to what can I learn and how might I do this my way? Or is what she's doing even something that I want for my own life? That changed everything. Another thing that I did was I went back and I looked at listener feedback to see what was resonating with my audience, what was really hitting the mark. And those two things together made a big, big difference. And within a year, I had developed my own approach to visibility that felt much more true to who I am. And it worked. This awareness gave me more confidence to lean into my own unique value proposition, but also to stay true and aligned with my values and what made the most sense for me and my family, especially in this particular season of my life. So here's a micro tool that you can consider. Use what I call the curiosity reframe. When you start to feel that envy or self-doubt, replace the thought, I could never, with what can I learn? And then go a step further. Look at your experience equity, the skills and experiences that we talked about building last week in episode 341, and ask yourself, what might be a way that I can showcase my own unique attributes? Friend, you're not trying to copy someone else's path. You're learning from what they've done and translating it through your own lens. And another powerful move, you might consider reaching out to the person that you admire to create a connection and to really learn firsthand from her. Most successful women I have found are incredibly generous with their insights. The person you're envying from afar might become your next mentor, maybe a collaborator, or just a friend if you approach her with genuine curiosity rather than with that eye of comparison. Okay, let's talk about the third ghost, the mask of overconfidence. Now, friend, this one is tricky because it looks like confidence, but in fact, it's really self-protection. And it is often rooted in both perfectionism and the fear of making a mistake. We often hide vulnerability behind certainty, thinking that we have to prove credibility instead of building connection. And that has several downsides, including missing the opportunity to learn and engage our curiosity. Now, I have certainly been guilty of this, especially when I found myself in jobs that were major stretches for me. I remember when I first joined the executive team at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I was surrounded by people who had been there for decades, people who understood the business inside and out, people who spoke fluent auditing and accounting, something that I did not, and who knew all the written and unwritten rules. And I felt this enormous pressure to prove that I deserved to be there. I was also often one of the few or only women in the room, so I showed up to meetings after preparing obsessively so that I could sound authoritative. And if someone asked a question I didn't know, it was terrifying. But you know what happened? One day, watching a more senior colleague navigate a very tricky and complex set of issues, and I watched how he was confident and self-assured, but he still admitted to not having all the answers, and he created in the process a powerfully collaborative environment in asking for input and in creating a safe space to actually discuss and debate the issue. And I realized that I had been wearing this mask of overconfidence. And you know what it cost me? Connection. When you show up less open to embrace the uncertainty or maybe afraid of not having all the answers, you miss opportunities to create a truly open and collaborative culture. Your team will feel less safe bringing you problems. They won't ask you for help. They don't collaborate openly with you because you've signaled that's not what we're about. There is no room for trial and error, and thus we're not open to really learning. But here's what changed for me. I learned that real influence isn't about being the smartest voice in the room. It's about creating that psychological safety so that others can contribute their best thinking. And when you're willing to say, I don't know, or I'm still learning this, you build trust that no amount of polished certainty ever could. And another great example, this is from a woman that I coached. We'll call her Anna. She had recently been promoted to lead a team, and she was so focused on establishing her authority that she never asked her team for input. She'd make decisions unilaterally, and she would present them as final, and she thought that's what leadership looked like. But guess what happened? Her team became disengaged. They stopped bringing her ideas. They just waited to be told what to do. When she and I talked through this, I asked her, Anna, what are you protecting? And she admitted, I'm afraid to ask for their input, that they will think I don't know what I'm doing. And so we worked on what I call strategic transparency, sharing the why behind decisions, acknowledging uncertainty where it exists, and genuinely soliciting perspectives. And the shift, frankly, was remarkable. Her team came alive. They started problem solving proactively because she removed the mask and she let them see her as a real person, not just a figurehead. And here's the thing that oftentimes people don't tell you. No one expects you to have all the answers. That's not why you were promoted. You were promoted because of your judgment, your values, your ability to bring people together, your strategic thinking, and your experience equity. Not because you're a walking encyclopedia. You'll be much more effective when you build collaborative connections that make you and your team much stronger and better problem solvers over the long term. Now, here's something that you can do to practice this. It's another little micro tool. Reflect on one small moment when you didn't have it all figured out and what you learned. It might sound something like this. Maybe say to yourself, I tried this approach last quarter. It didn't work. Here's what I learned and why we're taking a different path now. Or maybe ask yourself or say to yourself, I don't know, I don't have experience with this particular challenge, but here's how I'm thinking about it. What am I missing? Or maybe I made a call that turned out to be wrong. Here's what I'll do differently next time and why. Friend, that kind of honesty with yourself, but also with your team, builds trust faster than a polished facade ever could. And it models the kind of psychological safety that allows your whole team to take smart risks and learn quickly. Okay, so let's bring all of this together. These ghosts, perfectionism, comparison, and overconfidence, are really just distorted reflections of strengths. High standards, ambition, self-assurance, and doing our best. And those are not bad things. When we shine a little light on them and we become more aware of when we might be engaging in them in ways that are actually counterproductive, they lose their power. Influence starts with self-awareness, which means noticing when old narratives try to hijack your thinking and learning to choose differently. Now, friend, if you caught last week's episode 341, you already have 4 great tools for self-influence. So this week, try pairing them with today's ghost-busting frames in our Halloween special. Use your experience equity inventory to counter perfectionism. When the voice says, I'm not ready, look at your track record and remind yourself, I've launched imperfect things before and I've learned from them. Progress beats polish. And remember to use micro-win tracking to quiet comparison. When you find yourself measuring against someone else's highlight reel, just look at your forward movement. What did you do this week that moved your mission forward? That's the scorecard that matters most. And then use your strategic vulnerability to remove that mask. The next time you're tempted to project false certainty, pause and ask yourself, what would it look like to be real here? What small truth could I share that really builds connection? When you pause and notice what you've learned from each moment, even the really small ones, that awareness adds to your experience equity. And experience equity acts like compound interest. The more you invest in noticing, reflecting, and applying those lessons, the more valuable your experiences become over time. And here is the beautiful part. When you learn to exorcise those ghosts, you give permission for others to do the same. Your team, your mentees, your community, even your family, they're all watching you. And when they see you choose courage over perfectly polished, curiosity over comparison, and authenticity over performance, you're not just influencing them, you're actually showing them what's possible. So, friend, what about you? Which of these ghosts has been haunting your influence lately? Maybe during this Halloween week, instead of just carving pumpkins and passing out candy, maybe carve out a few minutes to name that ghost and maybe thank her for what she's taught you and then let her go. Because here's what I know for sure. The most powerful influence is never about who you should be. It's about showing up as who you already are, but with courage, curiosity, heart, and, most importantly, a willingness to grow and learn. Your perfectionism taught you excellence. Thank it and choose iteration. Your comparison showed you what you value. Thank it and then choose your own path. And your mask protected you when you needed it to. Thank it and choose connection. These ghosts aren't the enemy. They're just old strategies that have perhaps outlived their usefulness. So, friend, if this episode and these tips resonated with you, I would love for you to share it with a friend who might be wrestling with her own ghosts, or maybe leave a review. I'd love to hear from you. It helps. Those reviews, of course, help other women find She Said podcast and to join our community of growth-minded leaders. Until next time, remember, nothing you've experienced is wasted, especially the parts that you've learned to reframe. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. And remember, She Said podcast is a weekly production of She Said Media. Take care and have a really happy Halloween.